Hi there! With the second part of the Exilium event and the next character's release approaching, it is time for another pre-release skill kit review. As I've just learned, the name Mechty is Russian for dream. I hope my pronunciation is close enough. If not, leave an angry comment below. Mechty is a dedicated supporter for the corrosion element, completing the trio by offering utility and plenty of damage amplification. In this video I'll showcase footage of seeing gameplay from Snows. The link to his video will be in the description below. As usual, because the official translations for Mechty's skill set haven't yet been released, I'll refer to her abilities and mechanics in a simplified manner. This review will provide a comprehensive overview of her gameplay and utility, and I'll cover the details of her build, including keys, fortifications and gear after her release. Without further ado, let's get to it. First, Mechty passively adds a permanently active buff to all allies on the field. This buff grants everyone a 10% AoE damage boost, further increases AoE support damage by 50%, and changes all AoE support actions to corrosion type damage. Essentially, this mostly addresses Petya's performance, making her kit function properly and justifying her spot on the corrosion team. Mechty typically starts a battle by using her ultimate. As you can see, this affects both her allies and the enemy. But before that, notice this unique buff on Mechty. She has two modes, or states, between which she can switch, and she starts the battle in a defensive mode that reduces her own damage taken by 30%, as well as lowering all stability damage she receives by 2. As she uses her ultimate, she switches from the defensive to an offensive mode. This lasts for 3 turns, during which she gains 30% bonus attack and defense and restores 2 confectance points at the end of her action. The ultimate has a 4-turn cooldown, so the normal pattern at V0 would be 3 turns of offensive mode and 1 turn of defensive mode. Being in the offensive mode has also an impact on her other abilities, which I'll get to in a moment. By using her ultimate, she applies a 25% corrosion vulnerability debuff to the nearest enemy, which for the damage calculation is the same as boosting everyone's corrosion damage by 25%. This debuff lasts for only 1 turn, but can be reapplied with her attacks via one of her fixed keys. Then, her ultimate also applies a defensive buff to all allies which function similarly to heat recovery. Once per turn, it activates upon being attacked, lowering the enemy's attack by 5% and cleansing 1 random debuff from oneself. If the enemy counters the ally's weakness, the incoming damage is reduced by 30%. When Kluke does her thing, you can see Mechty's most important contribution besides the damage amplification. All of Petya's assists now deal corrosion damage, which rapidly stacks up Kluke's dot, corrosive infusion, and her buff competitive spirit. Since the boss is weak to corrosion, this also significantly boosts Petya's stability damage. With Kluke's 2 ultimates and Petya's 6 assists, the boss loses in total 38 stability, of which 32 were taken off by Petya. As you can see, the boss is now at 7 stability, down from 45 before Kluke's attack. This is relevant because most bosses have a strong damage reduction effect tied to their stability index. Note that Kluke's dot was fully maxed with this attack on round 1, as well as her buff, which is at its limit of 12 stacks, granting Kluke 60% bonus damage for the remainder of the fight. Since Petya's assists now deal corrosion damage, they can recharge 6 confectance points for Kluke even when Kluke doesn't have her fixed key strong support equipped, meaning she no longer relies on support attacks when she fights alongside her corrosion allies. Instead, you can slot in another key like No Mercy for extra damage. Moving on to turn 2. When Mechty is in her offensive mode, she will, if available, start with her S2, which costs 3 confectance points and buffs all allies in a huge 8-tile range, covering almost the entire area of typical sized bossing maps. First, Mechty cleanses all debuffs from herself and restores 6 stability. The aforementioned 8-tile area buff boosts everyone's AoE support damage by 30% for 2 turns in addition to her permanently active passive boost of 50%, totaling 80% increased AoE support action damage. When she's in her offensive mode, she also gains extra command after using her S2, and a personal 10% damage boost, which can stack up to twice for a total of 20% extra damage. Here you can see the 30% AoE support damage boost applying to all allies in range. Since Mechty recharges 2 confectance points while in her offensive mode with only 1 turn downtime, she can practically keep this buff active the entire battle. The extra command allows her the use of her S1 or basic attacks. The effect can only trigger after her ultimate was used, so this is not a restriction but rather a consequence. Note that her S2 also generated swamp tiles in a 2-tile area around the boss location. This is due to one of her fixed keys. Like other elemental tiles, swamp tiles implant corrosion weakness in the enemy standing on them. Mechty's ability to reliably create these tiles is one of her biggest contributions to the team when the enemy is not weak to corrosion by default. Now Mechty uses her S1, which deals corrosion damage for 130% of her attack in a small one-tile area. When Mechty is in her offensive mode, this skill will also create swamp tiles for 2 turns in the target area. Note that with the corresponding fix key, the skill can also apply a 30% defense shred before dealing damage. This overlaps with Clukei's V3 upgrade, so this is only of interest when you're running her with an unduped Clukei. As I've previously alluded to, Mechty can also equip a key that reapplies a 25% corrosion vulnerability to the enemy if it's weak to Mechty's attack. This effect is not tied to her S1 and can also be activated by her basic attacks. As you can see, this attack triggers Petya's assist. If you have a V6 Petya, you can get up to 8 assists out of her when running her as part of the corrosion trio. Continuing with the third turn. First, notice Mechty's cooldowns. It will be 3 more turns before her ultimate is back up, resetting her rotation to its beginning. As you can see, her S2 is not restricted by a cooldown, but rather its confectance cost. The skill's cost aligns quite neatly with Mechty's ability to restore points, so even though it will need to have a minor downtime, its effects last for 2 turns, making this only a minor issue. Her S1, which was used on the previous turn, has a cooldown of 2 turns. Therefore, in combination with her S2 and the appropriate fix key, she can permanently keep swamp tiles active. Using her S2 here is optional, since its effects last for 2 turns. Using it again refreshes both the 2-turn buff duration and the swamp tiles on the boss. Now, the only available option is her basic attack. This is the first time that I explain the effect of a character's basic attacks in one of my reviews, but Mechty's are actually worth going over. When she's not in her offensive mode, her basic attack is like any other, dealing 80% of her attack as physical damage. However, when she is in her offensive mode, the damage type is changed to corrosion and deals extra stability damage, as well as restoring 1 confectance point for her. As you see from the target stability index, this simple attack will take off 8 stability points. Importantly, Mechty can equip a fix key that allows her basic attacks to dispel up to 2 buffs from the target. As shown, the boss currently benefits from a 75% defense buff. By having this key, Mechty adds significant utility to the team, making team building less restrictive against these types of boss mechanics. Finally, keep in mind that this attack will also reapply the corrosion vulnerability debuff, so having Mechty go before your corrosion damage dealers is generally preferable. Upon initiating her attack, the defensive buff from the boss is dispelled, and everyone gains a stack of siege. Continuing with turn 4. As shown, her skills other than her S2 and basic attack are still unavailable. Therefore, this round is a mirror of the previous one. It is also Mechty's last action before her offensive mode switches back to the defensive one. As her attack concludes, you see the mode switch. The most relevant consequence of this is that her S2 no longer grants extra command. Since Mechty wants to either attack or use her ultimate to reapply the 25% corrosion vulnerability debuff to the target, her S2 buff, which boosts AoE support damage by 30%, will have to run out on the next turn. Next, turn 5 is the dreaded downtime of her offensive mode. With her ultimate still 1 turn away, this is the most awkward point in her rotation. As I've just said, Mechty wants to reapply the 25% corrosion vulnerability, so attacking takes priority. Keep in mind that the swamp tiles on the boss will run out on this turn. If you want to maintain them throughout the fight, you'd have to use her as 1 here. Since the boss is innately weak to corrosion, this is not necessary. Instead, she uses a basic attack in the most literal sense and keeps her as 1 for better DPS on turn 7. On turn 6, we're basically back to the point where we started on turn 1. Mechty's ultimate is available, enabling the switch back to her offensive mode and reapplying the vulnerability debuff to the boss. This is also where she can restart recharging her confectance points, so that her S2 will be available next round. On this turn, the buff from her S2 has run out, so Petya will have to live with 30% less bonus damage for her support actions. The swamp tiles are also gone and will be reapplied on the next turn with her S2. To summarize, this is Mechty's gameplay loop. She starts the battle by using her ultimate, switching her to her offensive mode and applying the corrosion vulnerability debuff to the nearest target. Due to the vulnerability debuff, Mechty should always go before her corrosion allies. You use her ultimate whenever it is off cooldown to reactivate her offensive mode. Her next priority is her S2, which provides an additional 30% damage boost to AoE support actions for 2 turns. You will want to keep this buff up as much as possible when Petya is on the team. Since this takes a lower priority than the vulnerability debuff applied by her attacks, her S2 should only be used while it grants extra command, meaning on turn 2 and 4 with 1 turn downtime, then turn 7 and 9 and so on. Then, your choice is between her S1 and a basic attack. Her basics can dispel buffs while her S1 deals more damage. If your Clukei is below V3, the S1 can also be used to apply a 30% defense shred. Both her S1 and S2 can create swarm tiles in the target area, so if timed correctly, the uptime can be permanent. Therefore, since her S1 has a 2-turn cooldown, you should not delay its use if you want to refresh the swarm tiles on turn 5. Otherwise, just time it for the highest DPS. Next, on turn 3, you can but don't have to use her S2 to refresh the 2-turn duration of its effects. If you used her S1 before, you're now stuck with basic attacks. If you didn't, it depends again on whether you need to dispel buffs on the target. This process is repeated for one more turn while her offensive mode lasts. On the 5th turn, you will want to have her S1 ready if the target is not weak to corrosion. Otherwise, her swarm tiles will run out. If that is not necessary, or you really need to dispel a buff, a basic attack will do the job, which also reapplies the corrosion vulnerability. The effects of her S2 from the previous turn are still active on this turn, but will run out on the next. On turn 6, the cycle begins anew. In conclusion, Mechty is a missing link that ties together the corrosion element, offering damage amplification and considerable utility. In total, she boosts Clukei's damage by 35% so long as you maintain her 1-turn vulnerability debuff on the target. In addition to that, she almost permanently boosts AoE support actions by another 80%, thus granting the majority of Petya's output a whopping 150% damage increase. Moreover, she passively changes Petya's assist to deal corrosion damage, which synergizes better with Clukei's buff and dot stacking, and greatly increases Petya's stability damage. As we've seen earlier, she alone took off 32 stability from the boss via her assists. Another important contribution is her ability to permanently maintain swarm tiles. This makes her essential for the team when the boss is not innately weak to corrosion, as Clukei's weapon trait needs to exploit corrosion weakness for its 20% defense ignore, not to mention that the team would struggle to quickly break the stability of their target. Then, she provides utility with a reliable buff dispel that can be accessed without downtime. Having this in her kit makes team building easier for fights that require you to counter such boss mechanics. Finally, her kit is complete at V0, which is quite unusual for most supporters in this game. Most of her upgrades only boost her own damage, and her only other relevant breakpoint would be her V6, which increases her damage amplification further. Even her signature weapon is skippable by only providing a team-wide 10% corrosion damage boost, thus making her a very light investment for good account value. That said, the corrosion team is tied to an invested Clukei, at least V3, preferably V6, since you wouldn't bring the team to a boss fight otherwise. Similarly to Dushevnaya, who is tied to the ice element, Mechty is very corrosion specific with her amplification. Besides a 10% AoE damage boost and the ability to dispel buffs, her kit generalizes very poorly. Unless a new non-corrosion unit releases that heavily relies on AoE support actions, Mechty will only have that one use case as part of the corrosion trio. Moreover, Mechty is kind of playing favorites, as a lot of her amplification is directed toward AoE assists. Clukei is benefiting much less from Mechty than Petya, so when a boss is innately weak to corrosion, Mechty is the first to drop from the team. This may change in the future when Mechty's mod key gets announced or a new corrosion character is released, but until then, her spot in the lineup is not guaranteed. And with that, we have come to the end of this video. I hope my review has helped you better understand Mechty's kit and enables you to make an informed decision on whether she's worth your pulse. Her value is very much determined by your interest in the corrosion element. She is not a universal support, but excels in her niche. While she benefits Petya more than Clukei, the trio is still very strong and pairs well with other elements that field a strong pair. One popular example would be the Hydro duo of Tololo and Springfield, and another option could be Macchiato with Dushevnaya once her mod key releases. Overall, my recommendation would be to get a copy of Mechty if you're invested in Clukei or are able to borrow one, otherwise save for better days. But let me know in the comments which way you lean. In any case, thank you so much for watching. See you next time.